You've just accessed Hardware is Forever, your source for the expert insights, ideas, and innovations you need to do more in the electronics manufacturing industry. From optimization to operations, join us as we put the pieces together for a better approach to manufacturing. Let's go.
This is Hardware is Forever. I'm Chris Mitliff, and we're back with Jay Patel, CEO at Amtech, and we've got a guest. And I love when we have these conversations. Jay is always introducing us to interesting people in Jay, in your network, in your business relationships. And today we've got Jesse Beeker, and Jesse's from TWIG Power, and I think that's an interesting name. I'm curious about that. Welcome, Jesse. And I think we're always interested in understanding how there's a connection between, not just between companies, but between kind of how we do things. So how Amtech does things, how Jay approaches business, how Amtech approaches business. What about that connects with how you do business and with what TWIG is looking for and with what you need? And it's more than just ordering parts or ordering a service. It's about something deeper. So let's get into it by just kind of introducing us a little bit to TWIG. What do you do? Why do you do it? When did you start it? Who do you do it for? Just kind of give us the lay of the land.
Yeah. Let me start with the easy part of that. We started in 2019, so it's been about 5 years since we started it. We're a true startup, which is kind of interesting in the space. A lot of companies are evolving businesses or et cetera. But we started with absolutely nothing. There was a little bit of time period where I could actually say it was in my garage for a while, that kind of history. So I believe in an interesting story. So I think there's lots of anecdotal pieces along the way that we can reference, but really important for startup to go through phases and develop. I've also worked for startups in the past where we started with way too big, very large startups where you have all the money in the world and all the ambition in the world, and those have failed. So I've been at kind of all ends of the spectrum and trying to find good balance with having this being my first startup company, not that I'm an official owner of. So we've been, for about 5 years, we've been developing what we call light electric powertrains. So this is all the electrification movement that's been going on for quite some time now. And we started with, kind of what do we want to do? I had a customer or potential client in mind, and we worked together for a year before we even started TWIG Power, saying, what do we want to do? How do we get an investor involved and things of that nature? And what we did was we did something that most startups don't have, and we built in an alpha customer, right? I've been through a lot of startups, watched the community, and there's that one thing that every startup is so hungry for, and that's they want to say, I'm in production, right? That's a big deal when it comes to when you're making a hard tech type of component. If you're doing software, there's obviously a lot of varying degrees of production product there, because you can always change the product pretty readily. But when you're doing something that's hardware and software, real components going out into a business-to-business atmosphere, it's a really big deal to say you're in production. So we were able to build our technology from the ground up with that mission in mind, that we have a production application, and then still build it in a way where we knew the next customer is going to be something different or slightly different, and really take kind of a derivative approach to enable future business. So that's what we're about right now. I will say, like, one of the earlier ideas was, boy, wouldn't it be nice we just bought a motor, maybe some cells, maybe make a battery, maybe write some software, but try to piece this thing together with off-the-shelf components. And that would have been a much easier path. But what ended up happening is none of that worked out, and we had to make everything. And that's really what the core of TWIG is about. So when we were looking for names for the company, we kind of pulled all the classic things, scale this, scale that, kind of mentality, because I think that's kind of the natural pitch that people want when they want to think big. But what we ended up with, TWIG, meaning the whole is greater. And it's really a play on the sum of the parts is greater than just the individual components, right? Which is a pretty big thing these days, because one of the core beliefs that I believe in today's business and technology is there's nothing simple left to make. There really isn't. I've heard of people getting rich off of extracting silver out of used X-rays and things like that. There's those great points of interesting success, of cleverness, but nothing's that easy anymore, right? So it means we're going to have to be very complicated. It means everything's going to have to work together, whether that's mechanical, software, electrical, and sometimes chemical because we do batteries, right? All that has to be compatible, or you either don't have the thing you're working on, or there's some other massive compromise. So that really feeds into what we like doing. I say it all the time when we have new customers and interesting discussions. We like making the things that nobody else can, right? So, and that feeds into our DNA here with the staff and the talent we've brought up here. Everybody here is more or less a hybrid engineer. And when I say hybrid, they're obviously not gas and electric engine type of propulsion. It's that they cross domains, right? So there's the classic, trend of education. I get a mechanical degree, I get a electrical degree, and the reality is those topics become so broad that they're almost meaningless sometimes when you enter the workforce because you need to be specialized, right? So in this case, what we really have done is we have engineers that they don't like those boundaries. They don't stand by those boundaries, so they can cross into the mechanical domain, electrical domain, and software all together, so that you can create something much better from the onset. And then that extends even into manufacturing type piece, which I think would be a good dovetail into obviously discussion with Jay and Amtech. It's so important to know how to make things. That's a lost art sometimes, especially coming out through higher education. But at the end of the day, that really defines what you can do, right? If you design things that are so complicated that can't be assembled, or even more so, you got to know what the assembly technology you have at hand is, right? It's really important. And I can say it definitely on a circuit board level. We've designed some circuit boards that definitely couldn't be manufactured, right? Maybe individually pieces of the circuit would work, but in the end, we didn't understand the manufacturing process and we're trying to do too much. So then you got to kind of figure out how to redesign, repartition, things of that level to be successful. So
thank you. There's so much there that I'm interested in. And I want to go back to, and Jay, I already have some questions for you, but I want to go back to this alpha customer. Did that allow you to really laser in on, I'm a marketer and I don't love the phrase customer avatar because it's taken on a thing, but we all like to be able to picture who's that person, who do we do business with? And sometimes we make that up whole cloth, or we do a bunch of market research and we think, well, maybe there's an opportunity here, but you had a specific thing in mind. How did that inform really how you built the company? I mean, have you found yourself expanding on that, or there's now variations of that, or have you kind of stayed laser focused on some of those characteristics that you recognized right away, or how has that just evolved for you?
Yeah, I think it's involved more to, we had so much to do, and obviously bringing up a large technology like powertrain, it really enabled us to make sure that, we're closing the loop by having to make things, having to deploy them in real applications, and help us find what was right. And I know that's the big term. I hate the words like best and right, but in a world, especially in the small business world, and even in generally in today, it's, there's a lot of information. You're always looking for the compelling argument is what I say all the time, so they can make a decision, right? There's always in engineering multiple solutions, multiple answers, multiple suppliers, things of that nature. And how do you choose, right? So having that alpha customer all along from the beginning and helping us make manufacturing decisions as we designed made a huge difference to us. It made it so that we didn't have, it really reduced the investment at the end of the day, because then we weren't totally relying on massive, capital equipment decisions that maybe haunt us, like the wrong decisions. So I can give you a good example, in the battery technology space for assembly. There's large equipments and automation that make big differences. And obviously you go look at what's state of the art and go talk to, people in automotive. They're very expensive, right? Well, we were able to mitigate that up, I would say for quite some time to keep, we'll call low cost technology that is very proven. And then that prevented us from having to park very expensive equipment sitting there doing nothing for large periods of times. So we've kind of kept that same mentality all along. There's, where, today I'd say, we don't have a high utilization of all these manufacturing technologies, but as we grow, we're going to be able to replicate those things start becoming more efficient. So thinking with the end in mind, another key principle here, we're looking at, ultimately, if we're going to be successful in manufacturing, you need to be running high percentage utilization of all the equipment and staff and et cetera. So by not going out and having these high, very expensive equipment and designing with these limitations that we have, we're able to do it on a much, much lower capital investment. And then when I look around and say, oh, well, the welder's not running today, it's not, I'm looking at tens of thousands of dollars, not $250,000 plus in idle equipment, right? So that helps us, and we still got plenty of capacity. But then, then it makes it so that we've established a core business foundation. Then we go look at these other more advanced technologies, which is something we're looking at now.
I did want to say one thing on here is, even though, the capital investment was reduced, you're not getting those large equipment, but I don't think the quality has been too big of a deal or an issue. You've been able to get equivalent quality, and I think one thing that I noticed, when we've met and we looked at your facility and you toured it and showed me, what you're doing, a lot of unique approaches to manufacturing have been developed in-house, and I don't know how many other people do that. But I think you've really either you've accepted your constraints or generated constraints for yourself, and really developed some robust, smart solutions to be able to deliver your product within the constraints that you have. Which even when I saw it, it was pretty eye-opening on how you were doing things. And I do manufacturing I'm supposed to be doing manufacturing for a living, and some of the things that and applications, solutions that you put in place were really something that I could learn from as well. So I think in the business that you're in, having the type of customer, having your approach, having your constraints, you guys have really done a great job in being able to set yourself up for success, at the lower scale, and then take those lessons learned and scale them without having necessarily all of the capital investment required that a typical company would need.
Yeah, I think that I appreciate the comments, Jay, there. A really good, simple as this is, our first building was basically, I would say, the lowest commercial space I could find in Novi here. And we filled that up to a certain amount. And once that lease terminated, we were ready to move to a new facility. But just that experience of finding out what is right, what are those manufacturing technologies we need, what are the equipment, what is the space, what is the right flow, and keeping in mind it's not just, we're manufacturing battery packs here, that safety element is huge all the time as well. So then once we did that, at a low cost, we bring that to our facility today, which you've seen. Now we know what the requirement is going into that new building, and that's something that's not well understood typically for a startup. What do you really need? How do you set this up? So keeping things simple and small while it was obviously a period of time makes a lot of sense, but you're doing that naturally through development, and it lets you kind of prototype the business, the manufacturing aspects. I say a lot of times, knowing what you don't want is almost as important as knowing what you want, right? So going through that phase, I think was really critical. And then obviously the staff really appreciates it now when we have full air conditioning and a nice place, and makes retention of talent here much better.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say that I'm not going to give it all away, but I think in your product architecture, you've done it in a way that allows you to take your core technology and scale it really, really well, which I think is very important when you're not doing business at a certain scale. If you're a high mix type of environment or something that's more customized, like you were talking about, you have to customize the entire solution. That modularity really helps, and I think that's a smart way of doing it. Not a lot of hardware startups do that, and I think you guys did a really good job with that approach.
Yeah, I think so, and that goes hand in hand with, keeping in mind we always need to think, how do we get to scale and things like that. And obviously there's industry experience there to know what the difficult challenges are of electronics and manufacturing. But that approach that you speak of, where we've modularized everything, was instrumental in development. And even now, even down to the schematic level, has been a really, really enabling a real big return, at least from a time and execution perspective, that we're living day to day right now. Because now what we've done is, instead of taking a very pointed, how do we make the most low cost single thing for this lead application, we can do things like turn entire new battery packs in weeks, where it'd be months to calendar years to get something where you talk about production. So that turns into situations where not only can we can make these derivatives really quickly. For example, I think we've released like 4 different new circuit board designs this week to make a as fast as possible prototype for somebody. We couldn't do that without this thought process where in the end there are certain limitations. How do we mitigate that? And then bringing in the right mix of internal and external type of manufacturing capabilities and knowing where the difficulties lie. Like, for example, we obviously don't have state-of-the-art aspects for a lot of the assembly capability. Well, and that's where then we bolster it with, a company like Amtech can go manufacture certain complex things in modest volumes. And then we don't have to deal with those kinds of really complex assembly technologies that would slow us down, right? I mean, if we're constantly dealing with assembly issues, technology doesn't go forward for a company like us. So we bring in that right mix of technology, internal and external, and then we can just start moving fast. And that does a few things interesting for us. Obviously, fast prototyping, fast technology derivation. But one of the future promise, so to speak, is, well, that kind of gives us hand in hand the keys to the car, so to speak, when there's business success, because we try to be as low as we can. From a raw material perspective, I think the comments I usually make, we make everything but cells and semiconductors around here, right? So by doing that, we can keep the cost of the materials very low for inventory purposes, right? Much easier to stock, a bunch of capacitors and ICs and circuit boards than full assemblies that may or may not have value in the future for this kind of dynamic business climate we're in and customer base. So if we're able to react, have those things on the shelf, we can turn things very fast. And then when the customer is ready to say more, we don't have to wait that full cycle, right? I mean, just imagine what it costs, when we go out and say, okay, I need 100 units. Well, that takes time, right? When you go from dozens to hundreds to thousands. But if we've got, the materials to at least keep going in, I'll call it the low volume dozens to hundreds, that gives us an avenue where the customer can ramp up, because customers never think about that. But we can keep them going, keep the business going, and grow. And our clients can grow together with us without having a big pause in time.
What's your sort of criteria for when you're going to reach out to Amtech? Is that something that is early in some processes, and then those prototypes can easily sort of work their way into a repeatable sort of production? Do you know that in your own space, like, you know what, this would be a great job for Amtech? Or do you get stumped and you want to seek out their expertise, or no, we just need some overflow? Like, how does that work for you?
Yeah. There's two clear paths when we.
So I just want to say, it's not only Amtech. It's like, as a startup, when do you start relying on your partners to help you scale? And I think in this case, we're lucky enough that we've been engaging on this level. But not only us, I'm sure you have other partners that you work with.
Yeah.
So when do you start? Yeah. What is the tipping point for that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I mean, all this technology is new. The products are new. In the battery space, it's not like you pull out the handbook of battery assembly and test technology, right? Or design, right? So we recognize that we're constantly, going forward with the best information we can, doing the best we can from obviously, technology or manufacturing, but also testing. So we look at it as, once there's a certain amount of time, once we've launched a product with a customer, that we've done enough units, we feel there's enough confidence from a field time perspective, that's when we can start looking at, okay, what do we outsource? What do we get? What is valuable for us to make? Because inherently what happens is we go, you do some pilot builds, you feel confident in the product, and you launch. And there's always going to be this wave back, right? You throw the rock out there and the waves ripple back at you. So what happens is you're like, okay, well, what are those issues? A lot of times, especially in our space, because we're talking about low volume manufacturing, we don't really know what the real issues are until, it could be half a year out there, because in electronics or even any complex product, dozens are a certain problem, hundreds are a different problem, set of problems, and thousands are an entirely, and millions. So I come from that high volume automotive space, so I know what it's like to support products that have millions of units a year kind of volume, and they're just very different, right? That's why automotive builds in hundreds of units for their product validation cycles, so that they can at least get that first wave taken care of, and then hopefully most of the second wave through evolutionary design. So that's a very important piece for us. So once we get through that cycle, and we can say, hey, this is it's more concrete than it's at least the second level of drying for the paint, so to speak. Then we start looking to outsourcing. How do we do it? What are the things that don't build a lot of value for us? But more importantly, we can trust the quality. The products here, there's always an inherent safety element. If things go wrong, right? So it's more than just the normal wiring harness and et cetera. So that's a big part of it, making sure that we can have designs that are stable enough, and we can trust the quality coming in to a level where, and it's not just about yield, right? I mean, it truly is a safety element here. Latent defects, if we have that kind of issue in the field in low volume, I mean, that takes down the entire company kind of situation. So quality is a big piece. The next piece after that, like that we're kind of entertaining right now, is that second level of hardening the design. Now, how do we start looking at cost reductions? Whether it's simply let's build more parts, right? Let's get out of the dozen space and let's build hundreds of units. And that's we've engaged a couple times here at the very least with Amtech, where we say, okay, this piece of it, we can start having hundreds. They're going to have better quality than us inherently because they are a high volume, high quality contract manufacturer living circuit boards all day. Then we bring those pieces outsourced. Then our time is better spent on integration test kind of features. And then the last phase that we'll probably be addressing the next calendar year. Now, how do we integrate some of these parts where they're maybe modular? Now, how do we get them to single boards? How do we get to that next level piece? And that more or less addresses the fact that the customer requirements, you start getting that real customer requirements once the product's been out in the field. You start seeing what those real challenges are at the application level. For example, maybe you want something that's more replaceable now, but originally it was integrated, right? Because you know that there's going to be a wear item, or maybe there's other difficulties such as shipping or replacement parts that you want to start addressing for the application.
So I do have one more question for you. We try to, we're our podcast Hardware Forever, and we kind of talk about product development and what it takes in the entire product life cycle, and how to strategically approach it, and then also talk about a little bit of the tactics as well. But I wanted to ask you, you've been through this journey since 2019. What advice would you give yourself now that you would have wanted to hear in 2019 when starting out?
Great question.
Wow. Yeah, and there's tons of it. I mean, probably, well, the first one would be obvious. Tell me that it's coming. And fortunately, I had a little bit of wind into that, right? I had, colleagues and et cetera in the automotive space that gave me the foresight to at least say, hey, get your parts now or you're not going to see anything kind of situation. But I think the advice to myself I would have embraced all the things I just said sooner, right? I think there were a lot of things where I'm probably a pretty conservative person a lot of times, especially when it comes to fiscal spending and things like that. I think the sooner we should have adopted some of these mentalities, especially making things in-house and bringing that kind of expertise would have sped things up a little bit. Mainly because during that 2019 challenge, it was supply chain, right? So it unfortunately we were still doing external builds and things of that nature. So that means, okay, we're going to make, it's our first circuit board A, and we're going to make 20 of them because that's we'll call it the right number. But it's never worked. We've never done it. So that put a big time piece on it for us. But also it used a lot of parts, right? So you're in a situation where 100 parts might be all you see for the next 12 months potentially in some of these cases, right? So doing a lot more sooner would have helped us, where we can be, okay, make one, be efficient, and then probably aligned us better on manufacturing processes sooner. So it's almost like, the best you can do is if you're bringing up the manufacturing at the same time you're bringing up the design, that can be very beneficial. So the fact that we kind of designed stuff and then kind of had to backtrack slowed us down a little bit. And then maybe we could have advanced a little bit faster.
So it's like design the product, but also in parallel, design the way that it's going to be manufactured.
Absolutely. And so I think there was a little bit of a lag there on the how it's going to be made side of things. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're doing battery packs with integrated battery management, living on it. I mean, that stuff's pretty challenging. So, but I think doing more of that, assembly sooner would be a bigger deal, and maybe making a little more investment in space away a little more equipment sooner rather than later, just because it's all about time when you're doing in that space.
Yeah.
And if you got to wait a day, that's probably palatable. But if you're waiting weeks for things, then that gets really tricky.
It feels like everything that you just said, all of that, as a reality, you have, however, been able to avoid some huge mistake making. It sounds like you've got a pretty intentionally efficient operation. You're able to quickly learn from and then make an adjustment. And I mean, since 2019, there's been a lot. And it feels like, without knowing much more, you've kind of have this interesting hybrid of skill sets that merge your startup experience with business leadership, with engineering. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like you're learning lessons quickly and that you're able to adjust and make adjustments quickly on those things rather than get slogged in so much of the stuff that can kill a startup, which is we were too slow. We did not adapt quickly, especially with the things that have happened since 2019.
Yeah, no, definitely adapt quickly. I think about that all the time. And even now, like, what are we going to be, right? I try to keep that open book, the pages unwritten, so that we ultimately figure out what we're going to be. Because I try to look to the past a little bit in those kinds of situations, right? If we need to be, a battery management company, a software company, I mean, those are all pieces there that have strong value. And obviously today our value is in putting all these things together. But I think ultimately, we're going to see where some areas have more demand or more stronger. I specifically see it in battery management right now, where we need to start looking at general market kind of solutions. Whereas we've been obviously very closely tied to internal solutions that enable whole products. But that's just, you're going to have to react to the market. Just like we know we made a platform technology for all the electronics, we know the business kind of needs to be a platform too, so that as we see a need in other areas, that's where we can go.
Jay, you mentioned early on how when you were exploring their manufacturing capabilities, you thought, well, there's some things here that I could learn. You're a family business. You've been around for a minute. You're not a startup, but you personally, in my experience, have a startup curiosity about you. You're always looking for that. How can we make this predictable and efficient and quickly learn or adjust? Does that resonate with you as in kind of that business relationship when Jesse comes with an idea or whatever? Do you feel like you have shared mind space a little bit in that way, that you see things or are capable of seeing things from his perspective?
So first of all, Jesse is on a whole other playing field than I am. Like, he's just phenomenal. So I don't know if I would be able to do what Jesse does. He brings a lot to the, like you said, he has a multifaceted experience at leadership level, engineering level, manufacturing level. So, but there is a lot of things where, because of the experience that I've had, I've seen other people do things. I think, the nice thing about, we've been engaging for a while. We've been talking, even before TWIG, we've been talking about how to, grow the business. And I think the nice thing about Jesse was that he was always asking questions and asking about what lessons can be learned, what lessons can be implemented, how can we do this the best way. And I think that entrepreneurial mindset of creating something from nothing and the grind and like, okay, we don't have a budget for this, but we got to make it happen type of thing. It's like, you need to do things in spite of the budget. I think that's where I think a lot of times Jesse and I can resonate and feel the pain, business ups and business downs, lows, highs and lows. I think we can talk about it and relate and just grind through it and find a solution. And I think that's where I feel like there's a connection with Jesse. So,
and I'd say there's probably the additional thread is like, not everything needs to be 100% cookie cutter on paper from a business perspective, right? And I think looking at things like, is there mutual long-term benefit? Is this taking us in the right direction? I think that's things you've got to consider all the time. I think you do all the time, Jay, really well. How do you make sure that, for example, if you never take a certain type of job or in a different industry or a customer type or assembly, right? You always want to maintain that diversification. So if you're not doing those kinds of things, even though they might not be the beautiful 200% margin or things of that nature, those are very important entrepreneurial things that we do all the time. Because we get challenged with make something with 3 bullet points of description and say go.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest challenge for me. Like, well, how much is it going to cost, right? And that's the make or break question, right? And that's what Jay answers all the time. It's what I've got to answer all the time as a business owner. And that skill is critical to the success, right? Because you could be signing up to lose money every time you do that. And as a startup, making things that have never been made before, that question always has the wrong answer, whether it's too much for the client or it's, or undercommitted on staff, whatever it means, right? So you're constantly operating this guessing world where all you can leverage is this long-term good business or not? And for us, like one of the keys is there going to be manufacturing opportunity afterwards, right? It's great to make this prototype that's the best of something, or at least in the customer's eye, what it needs to do. But is it going to be a piece where we're entwined for the long haul together, right? So that's where, obviously, if we make the prototype, there's that concept of it. And we just need to make sure there's good engagement, because then even if we do have a situation where it's not the best margin or there's elements of where it took more time than we expected, we know that success will carry over into the next phase or production situation where the investment will pay off. Because at the end of the day, we've got to pick and choose, right? Okay, we've got our resources. Where are we going to put them? That's our bandwidth. And if we put them on things that are just there to, for 5 minutes of attention, it's not going to be working, right? Because we could have done something else much more strategic and long-term profitable. That's where we got to be careful. But that's where we want to make sure that we're in that situation where we put our limited resources or finite resources on things that are going to carry over, either build value for us, because maybe it's just interesting, hey, we've done something in this space like home standby batteries or something that's unique that broadens our portfolio, or it's something where it's core to us and we're willing to negotiate a little bit here because we know when it goes to the next step, it's going to be a lot more profitable.
Jesse Beeker is at TWIG Power, which is at twigpwr.com. You've been so generous this morning with just your experiences and your point of view, and it's been fascinating. And I hope you'll come back sometime and talk with us again a year from now or something, and let us know what's new and what's been developing and what crazy, amazing thing worked better than you could have ever thought. And Jay, what amazing lessons have continued to be learned in this relationship, in this partnership. It's exciting stuff. And I'm really grateful for your time this morning and for sharing as much with it, and wish you all the best.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our subscribers and followers. Consider becoming one today wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. Hardware is Forever is designed, tested, engineered, and built by the manufacturing experts at Amtech. Learn more and let us help you envision your next project with a free Design for Manufacturing assessment at buildamtech.com/DFM.